Good evening, everyone. Allison Scoberg here with Consolidated Planning Group, and I am also the support group leader for ADDA SR, the Southern Region. We are located in Texas, and ADA has support groups all across the state of Texas. We happen to be a group that serves parents who have children with ADHD. We meet once a month by Zoom on the last Tuesday of most months. We take a break during the summer. And we have a different speaker every single month talking about topics that will help us on our parenting journey as it relates to parenting kids that have various disabilities, to include ADHD. And we also have a lot of families that have comorbid conditions, autism, and other things like that. So tonight, we are in webinar mode, and that means that we can't see you or hear you, but we know you're here, and we're glad that you've joined us tonight. If you're planning your evening, we're going for an hour, so you can plan on that. ADA is an organization that you can join. It was formed by Pam Esser way back in 1987, and she still runs it today. And she formed this organization with hope that it would provide help and resources to families for individuals that have ADHD, and that's why there's so many chapters. They have a conference, an annual conference that's very great, and they bring speakers from all across the U.S. in for that. There's never an obligation to join this organization. Tomorrow you'll get an email with a link to the recording of tonight's recording, and also a copy of all the slides. So everything you see on the screen, you're going to get a copy of those slides, so you don't have to take notes of everything. Also in that email, though, there is an opportunity to join the organization. I think it's super cheap, like $40 a year for a family to join. So you may want to check that out. So having said that, we are happy to be here tonight with Level Up Life. Ryan Roberts, he is a mental health counselor, and he's going to be talking about homework and the ADHD student. And I know as a parent myself, that is a never-ending battle in these households. So homework is definitely a challenge, and so we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts on that. So having said that, Ryan, tell us a little bit about Level Up Life, and then we're going to get straight into the content.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Allison. Level Up Life, one of our primary goals is to help students get to a point where they can live independently and do it quite well. Academics is a really good measuring stick for that. If they can do academics well, if they can organize well, plan well, regulate emotions well, socialize well, sleep well, if they can kind of take care of school pretty well, then they can start to manage life pretty well here. So we feel like those go hand in hand quite well. And school is also a major stressor for many of these students. Often is the major preoccupation for a lot of them. And so a lot of what we do is help students, especially those who are neurodivergent, manage academics. So we approach it from a more holistic perspective. So that's Level
What
Up Life.
wonderful. One thing I forgot to mention before we kind of dive into the content tonight, we do invite you to put your questions in the chat box. I'll be watching that,
Yes.
and we'll take as many questions as we can get to during our time together. So having said that, let's get started, Ryan.
Okay, let's do it. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a couple things to go over. Even though our focus and a lot of our specialty is executive functioning ADHD, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about it, but there's a lot of these skills that will be relevant for many executive functioning struggles, but some of them will be ADHD specific. So if you have questions about yourselves or your kids, do ask, and I can talk about how they may differ. ADHD. Some of the main things you'll want to keep in mind is that the terms ADD and ADHD got combined. This was a little while ago, and we have learned that they come from the same neurogenetic disease. Okay, so you're born with it, you have your whole life, and they get expressed in two different symptom clusters. All right. They get expressed in a few different ways, but now we're starting to hear different ways of them being described. My favorite one, and I say favorite because this is how it's often shown up in a lot of my clients, is motivation deficit disorder. Just getting started, initiating tasks, figuring out if we can actually get stuff done, even when you want to, is very difficult. So recognize that when I talk about ADHD, I am also talking about ADD. All right. Allison, would you like me just to notify you every time I want to go to the next slide? Yeah, let's do that then. Thank you, Allison. All right, so ADHD. One of the, this is going to be an oversimplification, but one thing that's good to know is that the brain is split between two different halves. Oversimplification for sure, but the front half is used for performing, knowing, consciousness, decision making. And the back half has a lot of memories. It helps us stay alive, motor activity. It's a lot of knowing. And what happens is with ADHD, there's this part in the middle. Go ahead and click once, Allison. There's going to be these guardsmen that kind of manage these urges that go from the back to the front. For many people, they do a pretty good job. So when you're a little bit thirsty, but not super thirsty, it doesn't let that urge through. So it doesn't enter that state of awareness yet. But for people with ADHD, those guards are lazy, they're underpaid, whatever it may be, they let every urge through. So those of you with ADHD or those of your kids that have ADHD, a lot of what happens is these urges that were originally a low priority or a low need, they feel like a big need because they've not entered your awareness. And all of these things come through. That's where the distractibility comes in. We want to do one task, and anything else that we get the urge to do enters that front part of our brain. It's very difficult. And so a lot of the times when we're working with clients, we don't talk about distractibility being evil, right? Distractibility is fine. It's a normal state of the brain, but it's the re-entering, re-engaging with the task how often we're trying to work on with clients. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So I simplified a lot, but the main thing to know when you're working with your kids is it doesn't take very much to teach them what to do. They'll know and they'll learn some skills very quickly. They may be resistant, but there'll be some skills that they learn fast, maybe some organization skills, for example. But being able to do it and implement it is the big difficulty, that resistance piece. So figuring out ways to help them manage that and get the emotional resources, the mental resources to do so is often the higher priority for a lot of these kids. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. For all of you, this is something I want you to be thinking about as we engage in some of these activities or engage in some of these pieces of education as we are learning how to help our kids. You're going to have a lot of skills come up. I don't want you to try and implement all of them. All right. Not yet. I'm going to tell a story. So I love to learn new skills. I learn new skills like every 6 months. I pick one and I try and develop it. And I read a passage as I was trying to learn magic tricks. It was a while ago and I loved it. The magician was Gene Hugard, an Australian magician. And he was approached by a fan who asked him, "Hey, Gene, I have learned 150 tricks from all the books that you have written. How many do you know?" And he was generally excited and wanted to hear it. And Gene sat there and thought, and he said, "I know about 6 or 7 tricks," which I love. And I read that from one of his books, which certainly had more than 6 or 7. And the point he's trying to get across is to come across as a good magician, he had to do a show and only do 6 tricks, and everyone would think he was good enough. And so I went and I learned 2 tricks, and that's all I knew for 3 months, and I mastered those. And everyone thought I was like amazing by all I knew. And for you as parents to be able to help your kids with a lot of these skills, you don't have to implement every single thing. We want to. And as we implement one and we see deficiency in another, be patient. The ones that you implement and do well with will be helpful. It'll be enough. Stick with it. And you can move on to some of these others a little bit later. All right. Okay, let's go to the first skill. Getting their foot in the door. So there's going to be these different stages that we're thinking about when we're working with initiating tasks and working with tasks. And we'll talk about the very beginning, which is they're not getting work done, and how do we get to that initiation phase. Sometimes just starting the task is enough. ADHD is very hereditary. Several executive functioning disorders are hereditary. Some of you who have kids with ADHD will also experience this. So you know that breaking away from a video game or a phone and just starting a task is enough to get going, right? It's called perseveration, the stickiness. right? We now know from more recent research that hyperfocus is not associated with ADHD. It's more associated with autism. Perseveration is what we now know is what's associated with ADHD. I am on a task. I say the word task, but it could be social media or watching a movie. And it's hard to go from that to something else, especially if that task was very rewarding. Helping your kids find ways to easily break away from tasks, especially rewarding ones, and make that less distressful, and entering a new task like homework that is distressing can help. So if they start a task and immediately bail, praise it. It's okay. They do it for 30 seconds, but they broke away from whatever they did before, praise it. Minimizing deliberation is a interesting concept for all of us that a lot of us can benefit from, not just ADHD. But when we have the thought to go do something, or we encourage them to go do something, doing it within about 5 seconds is huge. But if we deliberate for a very long time, that can consume a lot of emotional resources. So if the kid really struggles for 5, 10, 15 seconds, work out a different plan of compromise and you take a different strategy. Okay. And that's okay too. But we
This is a
really want
little
to help them out.
counterintuitive, so I want to
Yeah.
talk about that. It's because I
Yeah.
think as parents, a lot of times we're not praising the squirrel moments, right? Because there's a lot of
Mhm.
squirrel moments, right? Where there's something else. So you're basically saying when they have this urge to go do something else or do something else that we're praising that deliberation.
Yeah.
I
So let me, yeah. So that's
take
a,
that deeper for me.
yeah, absolutely. So I don't talk about this intervention a ton in this workshop, but one thing I do with a lot of my clients in therapy is we teach skills like, hey, go into a task intentionally that you know you get stuck with. So a lot of them pick something like video games. Like, okay, go in there for as long as it would take until you get about stuck. And for them, it's like 5 minutes. And at that point, they're absorbed. And I say, all right, now get out of that task. And they're like, that's going to be freaking hard. And they go and they get out. And then they go into a different task. So they intentionally go in and out, in and out. And what you're teaching your brain is that the stress of leaving a task doesn't have to be as high as it needs to be. So a lot of us have like, oh man, I can't put down my phone or I can't leave the video games and I have to go do homework instead. Praising the yes, you left whatever you're doing and you started a different task. That's huge. So perseveration is what keeps you on a task. And then we want to break that. Okay. You actually can use it to your advantage when you stay on homework as well, but we don't talk about that a ton today either. So good. I'm glad you brought that up. Deliberation is one of the tactics that you can use where you minimize it. So you do it in about 5 seconds. We just go 1, 2, 3, go, and you push for it. And we can go over some strategies there. But it's a really good question. Okay. And if there are other questions, we can address that here as well. So we talked about how we want to generate motivation, get them going, and reduce the resistance a little bit. I'm going to dive deeper into each of these items. So motivation. With ADHD, you build motivation fairly quickly and you lose motivation, you consume it fairly quickly. Motivation is used to manage and regulate distress or any kind of cognitive dissonance. And so for ADHD, especially when we're breaking away from something that is very dopaminergic, it was very rewarding, to something that's not very rewarding, that consumes a lot of motivation. So we can use tactics to help build that motivation so they can at least get their foot in the door. And that's one route we can go to help with that. All right. When they don't have enough motivation or they don't, or they're kind of on the cusp of it, it's very painful to do so. So helping them do that's great. And there's some exercises. Um, but you can certainly make sure that with your kid, that motivation is the primary resource. You treat it like gold. Okay. Another route we can go is re-engineering the environment, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But if they don't have enough motivation, you reduce the resistance to entering that task as well. If it takes a lot of effort to set up homework, you make it easier to enter. Okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So jumpstart skills. This is the building motivation. A lot of what we think here is like exercise is a really good example. what can we do to help them build some level of motivation for here and now? It's not necessarily a long-term habit or routine, but something we can work on with that kid to help them break away fast. And if they could be playing a video game, but if they can break away from that game to a Just Dance video or something, and they're exercising, but it's also a different task, praise them for that. Then shift from that, they've already exercised, to school. It's something I often do with some like 8 to 10-year-olds. Really, really good. But anything that helps them get quick motivation for the next 90 seconds is more than enough for many of them. Okay.
Um, what do you feel like, this is gonna sound crazy. My kids are grown now, but like I had one kid that literally if I let her spin around on a chair, then she would do her spelling words, or I could get her to do her math facts or whatever, let her bounce on a ball or a little
Mhm.
trampoline, and she would just be, you know, just shouting it out, and she would really be motivated if I was letting her be active. And I know that's a little counterintuitive as well, but we had some of our best homework times when I was letting her do ridiculous things like spin in a chair or
Mhm.
or something like that.
Yes. So one thing I've done with I do this in therapy sometimes. I'll be with a kid and they just can't seem to focus. And the mom is like, hey, you got to pay attention. They're constantly like almost shaming them for being distracted. And so I'll sometimes excuse mom and I'll say to the kid, I'm like, hey, I want to try something. Do you want to sit on the couch upside down for this? And they're like, yes, they have no idea what we're about to talk about. They just get to know they get to kind of like break a rule or do something they normally don't get to do. And suddenly their schema changes. And so we'll kind of like sit upside down and talk. But for them, what's happening is shame goes down in that instance. There is the stimulation side of it as well. There's some cool research about distraction free versus distraction reduced testing rooms. Distraction free rooms, ADHD students actually perform worse than distraction reduced rooms. If it's completely silent and they can't do anything, there's no one around, they don't do as well. But if there's actually some sort of noise, even wrestling in papers, they do better. So some level of stimulation actually goes pretty well for them. So there is that aspect. Not all of them need to move though once you hit about age 14. Some will the rest of their life, and then sometimes those symptoms die off. So you might find, you said your kids grew up, so maybe they don't need it as much anymore.
Right.
But a lot of you parents will find that some will need that now, but when they get older, that path kind of diverges. Some will always need some level of stimulation and some won't.
So what I saw with the teenage years was I need to listen to music while I do my homework.
Yes.
That was one of the things that we shifted to from movement, is like somehow I need music or something going on in my ear while I'm doing my homework. And that seemed like really, it seems like that would take your focus away, but it seemed to be okay.
Yes, you'll need some level of stimulation for a lot of people, and there's the distraction piece, right? So I'll tell them, like, yes, music's good. Try listening to music with either no lyrics or lyrics in a language that you don't understand. And that is often better than something, especially if you're writing a paper with English lyrics, that could be tough for a lot of them. But yes, like if you have a neurotypical brain, music can sometimes be tough, but for ADHD, it's actually incredibly helpful. So that even white noise is really helpful. They often don't prefer it, but uh, being in the same room as someone else is also fairly helpful. And we can talk about some of those also. Um, Re-engineering the environment. This is actually a really good slide to talk about some of this. So I worked at this treatment center. I was out in Utah, actually. It's like the treatment center capital. There's a bazillion over there. And when we think about helping students out, this is actually the fun part. How do we get them to do what we want without necessarily interacting with them directly or asking them to do that thing? And so we have to be creative and be clever. It's like a pipe dream for a lot of you, I'm sure, where you're like, yes, I'd love to just have them magically do it. It takes effort, but it is possible. And when I have parents do this challenge, the first like week or so, when this is the skill they pick, can be very tough. But they can get incredibly creative and do a fantastic job. Here's how I got this in the treatment center. This home, there are 12 boys' homes, and we got this entire home of boys to do homework without asking them. right? I'll super simplify this, but it's a pretty interesting story. But I was brought in and I was asked to help with the students doing academics, and none of the boys' homes are doing academics. So I was starting with this one. Long story short, we set up a study hall time, but we didn't enforce it. So basically, it was like we would turn off like electronics. That's fine, but the boys can kind of do whatever else they want. We've had no activities, but me and the other mentors, and we would sit at a table and we would look like we're studying. We'd either read a book, do our own homework, whatever it may be. I found a boy who was kind of like a ringleader, and I asked him for advice to help me with like some Sudoku puzzles. So he came over, and every time he helped me, I shared some pizza with him. So after a while, we were kind of sitting there looking like we're doing homework. Other people wanted food. Now it was a payment almost for like helping me out. They had wanted to help me out too. And we kind of went through this process of like, okay, there's a period of time where we work on puzzles together. There's a period of time where we don't do activities. And then there's a period of time where finally a kid was like, I need to go homework done because my therapist required, I can't remember what the reward was, but there's some reason why he would do it. He might get to go home for a weekend or something, but there's a reason it was very time sensitive. And so the mentors were like, no, I can't help you now, but the only time I'm free is during that study hall time. The kid brought it in and he ordered like the exact meal he wanted as a favor, basically. And we went like, there's item after item after item. When we didn't ask the kids, we made it very clear to everyone else that the more that they kind of worked around this time and did things that looked like that behavior, the more appealing it would be. And we were able, it took like 6 weeks, it was fairly fast. We were able to get all 12 boys to do homework for at least half of the city hall time during or by the end of those 6 weeks. So I went through that pretty fast, but this is doable. That was my challenge to the mentor, was not ask them to do homework, but set up the environment. And then by the time we asked them to do homework, it was very easy. But it was after the 6 weeks. So I have this list here, like social obligations. This is more like that pressure. Like if I don't do this, I feel silly. But making sure there's schedules related to that, and making sure we're working with medication as well. That's a neurology piece. If we're having trouble sleeping for like ADHD, there's like a huge sleep disorder relationship between ADHD and sleep disorders. It's like 65% sleeping cold, white noise in the background, things that you can do without necessarily implementing willpower based activities. Okay, so keep that in mind if you want to try and get your kid to do things without asking. Set up the environment as best you can. All right, next slide. Here are some examples. So I've told you about the principles. Here's how you can apply it. You will get these slides, so I will not go over them in depth. But some of the main ones, I think, for under 8 might be slightly different, but 8 and up, exercise is huge. Okay. Especially since the prefrontal cortex decision-making part of your brain does not get nearly enough blood flow for ADHD brains. And it's helpful for a lot of other reasons, but you only need to do about 90 seconds of cardio to get about 5 minutes extra motivation. So it's not a lot, but for getting your foot in the door and that approach, only 90 seconds. That's all you need. So not a lot. You can sit and ask them about the video game they're playing. You can ask about how they're feeling for the day, and we get really into the emotional side and dive deep. Doesn't matter, but you can build rapport and then pivot. That's totally fine too. Meditation can feel like torture for a lot of people with ADHD. It can feel rough because of that boredom piece. But meditation, we've seen, even though it's really, really rough, the motivation effects are actually huge. So even though this might be one of the harder ones, I did choose to list it because we actually see some of the biggest gains for it. So something to consider. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Reengineering the environment. Some really easy ones to implement, or just get other people involved. So get the other kids, even parents doing the same thing, bringing out special snacks only during that time. Even with phones face up on the table, some research shows that that's more distracting than phones face down on the table. Like just get them away from screens, even if they're off, and kind of create routines around it. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. That is all just initiating tasks. The rest of the sections get a little bit shorter, but usually the hardest part is initiation. And we've kind of skimmed the surface on that. Okay. So if you have any questions about initiation, go ahead and throw them in. Otherwise, we'll go on to how do we get them staying on that track with homework or redirecting them. That's going to be this next session. Okay. Perseveration. I hinted at it, I talked about it, and explained it as deeply, but we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can capitalize on this. The reason why we mixed up hyperfocus and perseveration so much for many years is because they look the same. Hyperfocus. The way I describe this is if you have a kid in a burning house and they're playing video games, but they struggle with hyperfocus to the extreme, they wouldn't smell the smoke, they wouldn't feel the heat. And so if we're calling out to them, we're like, yo, Ryan, get out of the house. They would not know that someone's yelling at them. Okay. Perseveration, they would smell the smoke, they would feel the heat, they would hear people yelling Ryan's name, but they have to finish whatever boss they're on. They had to get to a save point. Okay. So the behaviors often look the same because they get stuck. But one is aware, perseveration, they're aware of what needs to happen. They can't break away. The other isn't. So when you're thinking about your kid, like, is it hyperfocus that they're struggling with, or are they aware and they're backing away because they're anxious or feeling distress? That'd be more the perseveration. And so what we will do is if your kid struggles more with the perseveration side, the ADHD side, is we're going to help reduce some of that shame around, man, I can't seem to stay on track. I get distracted. I can't seem to go for a long time. I get bored. I have short study sessions. Whatever it is, this is what we'll focus on with them. Next slide. Okay. With motivation, again, it builds up, it drains very quickly. We want to let them know this is okay. This actually can shift over time, actually. There's several decision-making parts of your brain for people with ADHD. It's kind of in the middle. It's called the nucleus accumbens. It's a very dopamine-related part of the brain, and it's very much focused on external forms of reward. Okay, it's about 3 times more powerful than internal forms of reward. And so we're very, people complimenting us is very gratifying, for example, if you have ADHD. So what you will often consider when you're helping your kids is really praise small points of effort because it can be about the small pieces of effort, but it can also be about just recharging quickly and letting them know it's okay to take breaks, but also breaks don't have to be long. At first, they'll think that they'll need short study sessions and long breaks, but it's more like short study sessions and short breaks going back and forth. That's the skill that we'll try and manage. But when they take short breaks, it's really, really hard to keep it short and really hard not to get stuck. Okay, next, please. Thank you. This is the difficult part, though. At school, the ratio is so rough. Typically, up until about 10th, 11th grade, it's almost all the way through high school. Students to feel fairly like they're having a high quality of life at school, they need about 10 positive interactions for 1 negative one. It's about similar to what you'll need in like a marriage, 10 positive to 1 negative. People with ADHD get 1 positive for about every 17 negative interactions, right? Unless they learn some skills, but that is generally what you'll see. And so a lot of the times when they get distracted, oh, do you mind going back 1? Thank you. When they get distracted, that's where a teacher punishes, or they say, hey, stop doing that. Hey, sit down. Right? That's a negative interaction. And a positive interaction doesn't have to be a big deep talk or getting ice cream. Seriously, a high five. And usually if I do in-person workshops, I'll go and give 1 person a high five and they'll smile and like 3 people around them will smile. Okay. It's a really small interaction. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And so with distractions, it's the same thing, right? They'll back away. It's not a bad thing. Help redirect, help them be intentional with it. If they chose to break away, that's one thing, but those natural distractions, totally fine. Okay. If they did choose to break away, kind of work with it and work with some of the shame and anxiety and redirect. Okay. Really help reduce the emotional agony around that. Next slide, please. Thank you, Allison. All right. This is one that's a typically better exercise for people who are about 14 and up. So not for the younger people. And I actually do this for a lot of adults. This is really helpful for adults, but all that you really need to do to help that part of your brain reduce some of the distractions and build some habits around, okay, I'm tasking, I need to focus on the task. So remember those urges that kind of get past those guards, the front part of your brain. Those guards wake up a little bit better when you do certain tasks, when you do this exercise. In essence, I mean, you'll get these instructions later, but the main process is when you sit down to do homework, you'll start a timer. And when an urge or distraction comes in, write down what it is. Like go to the bathroom, go to my phone, like stand up and walk around, watch a YouTube video, and then you write down what the time is on the stopwatch. Usually it's about 10 or 15 seconds for the first one, right? They sit to work and almost immediately they want to bail. It's really fast. And the next one's like 40 seconds. And then one after that is like another minute, minute and a half. So very quickly, those first three urges of like, I want to peace out is in a couple of minutes. After the third urge, you then can take a break. Okay. And that can be in 10 seconds or like 15 minutes, doesn't matter. But after the third urge, you leave and come back and you repeat this process. Okay. Sometimes I say only 3 times a day, sometimes it's 5 times a day you do this. But what it does for your brain and for your adolescent brains is when you sit down to function and an urge comes, you acknowledge it, but don't do anything with it, is it helps your brain learn which ones do we actually have to take care of and which ones can wait. And then as over time, as you're working and you start to realize you need to take care of something, that's your brain learning. We kind of get through those guards. It's a very effective exercise. It does take several weeks for your brain to kind of get it figured out, though. Okay. But several weeks is still fairly fast. Next, please. Wonderful. Many of you may not know the name Pomodoro technique, but a lot of you are familiar with the concept of work, break, work, large break. That's really all the Pomodoro technique is. However, there's a lot of misinformation online about using the Pomodoro technique with ADHD brains. Okay. And there's actually a lot of neurodivergent brains that you might adjust it slightly differently for. Typically, what you'll do is you will do short breaks, or sorry, short work sessions and short breaks. The ratio is about what I'll have listed here. And there's actually a website I posted that you'll like, that many people like. But 10 minutes of work and about 3 to 5 minutes of a break. But I usually say 2 to 3 to my clients, and they usually go a little bit over. So 3 minutes of break. And you keep doing that. And then the long break, usually people can do a 30-minute long break and be okay. But with ADHD, I say about 15 minutes. They'll often feel like they need more. But typically, this is actually more than enough. For the small breaks, I often discourage YouTube videos, using phone, video games, social media. So basically like no screens. Walking, exercising, grabbing a snack, meditating, like some low stimulation break is far better, or at least those students perform far better with this approach. Okay, that's it for this technique and how you would adapt it to an ADHD brain. Okay, that was step 2. Okay, so we have some ideas how to keep them going, and it's not terribly different from what you do for most people, just a few adjustments for ADHD. All right, so we supported them, we got them started, we helped them out. We're trying to get to a point now where they can do more of it independently. There are a couple of ways we can think of this. When I work with clients, often parents want to pull a tutor away or a therapist or take them off medication or whatever intervention they use. Maybe the parents back off fully, they send them off to college, and then the child can do it on their own, which actually that would be wonderful. And some can. And I think I've even fallen into this trap where a client wants to discontinue therapy because they're doing so well, and I hope they can do everything just as well without therapy. I have this list here of 3 things that I would like you to consider instead, and consider any of them wins. Even if overall they do worse, they can do any of these better. I want you to highlight it. Okay. The first one, I'll read it and I'll describe it. Okay. Begin thinking of components they can start to do without you. So even if they can't do the whole thing and they don't do it as well or as quickly, but if they did some part of it and they did some part of it without you, praise that piece. You can tell them to do others with you, but at least praise that piece of it. The second piece, think of routines they can do, lower efficacy, lower efficiency. They can do the whole thing. Maybe they mess it up and maybe it took forever. But if they could actually go through a whole process, even worse though, that's fine. They went through it. Wonderful. Okay. And last one. Okay. If they do either of the steps, they can either do some components or they can kind of do the whole thing, but worse. We need at that point just say, hey, let's increase the efficiency, let's get a little faster, or increase the quality. Let's do it a little bit better. And then that's it. That's what we work on with them. Okay.
So I have a question on this.
Yeah.
Helping them do it on their own. I think that that is a common theme with the parents of their kids are requiring more hands-on, and they're in older grades and they still need quite a bit of support. When are they too old for all this support? And we know as parents that our kids are, I use the term loosely, but speaking of my own, late to the party. Like their brains develop slower. So they might be the age, but where they are functionally from a maturity level, they're not the same age as all the third graders from a maturity level that with the ADHD brain. When should a parent be thinking, hey, this might be a problem that my kid can't complete homework on their own?
Mhm. That's a great question. Um, there's on one end of the spectrum, there's a point into adulthood where there can be so much shame later on in life where like it's never too late to get that help, right? But developmentally, you're right. You're like there's this age consideration where once someone gets to about 21, it gets really close between a neurodivergent and a neurotypical brain. And by the time they're about 29, they basically are parallel for the rest of life as far as developmentally goes. They can learn skills and there's context certainly. But at a young age, that discrepancy is huge. And it's hard to know like how much of that is context, how much of that is ADHD. When do I get that testing done? Right. I would say if we're thinking about something like a neurodevelopmental disorder and it's academic related, I think it's okay to wait until about 8 to 10 years old. Typically, the things that at least I would test for and those of my colleagues would test for, we can get false positives for things that you can test earlier in different contexts. Let's take social skills, for example, or autism. Those things are much easier to detect in different contexts. But if you only see it in academics, it's probably okay to wait and see if it persists up until about age 8. You can still work with them on skills, but you probably don't need testing unless it shows up in other parts of your life. So that's about third grade. If it's very severe,
So some of the things that we've heard in the past is that we should get testing done early. So the kids that need accommodation in the school can get them, because our kids always stand to be ridiculed. They're always behind, and other kids aren't always nice. But if they're in the third grade and they're about 8 or 10 years old or whatever the age is at that point, we're that far down the road, and third grade is the grade that really starts getting hard. They start learning the times tables and other things like that. It kind of ups the ante, and then fourth grade is even harder. So what do you think about that? I think that the concern is that if they've been in the school all this time and they needed accommodations because the kid's dyslexic, for instance, or what
mm,
have you, that and they're not getting them, then there's an issue with that.
yes. So that is a great example of where, and you actually provided several good examples of where we see issues outside of academics. They're struggling with socializing or they're getting bullied or they might struggle with sleep. And so when we see other contexts where the same disability pops up, that's where my alarms start to go off. But if it's really just like, I don't want to do my homework and it's just some academic functioning, then I often look at other things instead, like how's the relationship with them and parents? Do they not do homework because they go home and there's something else going on there? So when you're saying things like dyslexia, we see this pop up outside of the academic realm. Yeah, that's a great example.
So you're thinking more like testing may not be necessary if we're just thinking it's just behavioral, more or less related to ADHD, but when maybe there's other suspicion of other comorbid conditions or very specific learning disabilities, then maybe testing earlier on that might be better. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, as long as you see some of these other warning signs. If it's just in one context, even if it's like just social, not academic, or just, there's some things I have to be a little careful with. And insurances will often be the same way too, where if you don't have a lot to go off of, but you make a diagnosis off of it, insurances can be a little worried about that too. At least under the age of 8, because there's so much variability in that. That's where my mind goes, and that's how
And
I
that and
approach it.
that also maybe prevents some of the false diagnoses. And I feel like diagnoses are being handed out like candy lately. Um, there's a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
them, and maybe they're accurate, maybe they're not, but it seems like there's a lot of labels. And the labels don't mean anything if you can't get the help for the child that they need. At the end of the day, it's kind of about helping the kid, not how many labels we can get for them absent the help. And so, yeah, I am definitely in agreement with that.
I'll say this though, because I'm glad you're bringing up a different point. Because the main point, even if you feel like, man, they're young, is it ADHD? It's maybe just academics, but every other part of their life is going well, right? Um, Accommodations you can absolutely go for whenever you need, though, right? Whenever the kid needs support in any category in the school, you can absolutely go to the accommodation team, IEP team, 504 team. Go and get the help whenever you need it. That is fully fine, though. You don't need a diagnosis for that. So I'm glad you mentioned that at least because they can still get the support they need either way. So I want to at least mention that. Thank you, Allison. Okay. Um, oh yes, procrastination. Oh, this is like always, whenever I do consult calls, one of the first things they always mention is procrastination. They wait till the last second. And this is actually another good example of, is it ADHD? Is it stress, anxiety, shame? Sometimes it's everything here, but procrastination is going to be one of the biggest things that occur for a lot of your students and your kids. I have I have a story about temporal discounting. I was working with my accountant. I was on a video call with him. His kid's name is Mikey, came up, and Mikey was like, "Dad, will you read a story to me?" And his dad, Jake, said, "Okay, I will in 10 minutes." So he grabbed a little like clock. He's like, "When the balloons get to here, I'll read a story to you." And Mikey goes, "I don't want to do it in 10 minutes. I don't want to do it. How do you say? I don't want to do it tomorrow. I want to do it today." And so in his mind, 10 minutes was too far out. And Jake and I were dying from this. And so for him, he was like a 5-year-old, I want to say. If it wasn't right then and there, 10 minutes, it might as well have been the next day. And I think a lot of you, especially if you have ADHD, can relate to this, where you're like, yeah, I have a paper due tomorrow. I feel no stress for it. I should, but I know I'm not going to feel stress for it until about 4 hours before it is due. Right? It might as well be next week or next year. That's how that kid felt. That's how probably a lot of you and your kids feel. That's temporal discounting. Our brains naturally do this. That's fine. But for ADHD, it's especially pronounced. So finding out how to get that emotional impact earlier is helpful. And I've done things like ask my clients to schedule a party or hang out with friends all day the day a paper is due so that they're forced to work on that paper a day earlier when they normally wouldn't. They actually have to plan a little bit because the day they normally would write it, they're busy all day. And so there are things that we can kind of work on to manage this. But this can be for rewards and punishments. Oftentimes you'll have to work with them about issues same day in order to actually get things done. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So these activities will differ based on what part of their developmental lifespan they are in. Okay? Because the ability to process and think about future events does change pretty dramatically for those that are under age 8, 9, 10, and those that are above that age. Okay. So under 8, I love doing this exercise. I will dive into one in particular, and it's asking them about how long they will feel a certain emotion. And you will hear all sorts of ranges from like, "Oh, hey, you're angry. How long will you be angry for?" And they'll say like 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days. They have no idea. And our body as adults can only stay at a heightened level of anger for like 186 minutes. It's like some number right just over 3 hours, like 186. You'll still be angry for a long time, but those neurotransmitters have to, it's called reuptake. They have to almost reset before you can feel it again. So your kid doesn't understand this, but they think they'll be angry for forever. Trying that out with them and doing that over and over and be like, all right, we'll check in 10 hours and see if you're still angry, or I'll check in 30 minutes and see if you're still angry. Helps them start to learn that whatever they feel in the moment isn't permanent. And they get a little better scale of time, and they do a little better with impulse control. I did want to highlight that one because some people who try to go implement later don't fully understand how it works. I do want to put that in if you do check the slides later. For older students, oftentimes the organization of their task list and breaking it down can be enough, but a lot of us will plan our tasks as though we are in an optimal condition. If we've written our paper, a 20-page paper in 4 hours before, then we'll plan every 20-page paper as though we can write it in 4 hours. But that means a lot of people, especially those with ADHD, they'll plan their task lists as though they're in the best condition, and it's going to be 10 times longer. That might be an exaggeration, but it's way longer than what they typically would do in a day. And it fills them with shame. It can be hard to prioritize, even if they're not feeling shame, but it's difficult to manage. They keep a lot in their head. So I often ask them to cut it in half and ask them to cut it in half again. So they might be left with like 4 tasks. And then they do that, or they make a do not do list. But basically, we really try new things with the task list, keep it short, but keep it intense. And we go from there. Okay, next, please. Wonderful. This is one additional skill. This is primarily for those that are about 21 and up, though. And it's a more advanced one, but I did want to mention it because for those with executive functioning struggles, you the research shows that you want to have your systems externalized, not kept in your head. And that would be task lists, calendars, and alarms. Okay. We don't go over how to do those in this workshop. Right? We'll go over one aspect of those, which is on your calendar, you don't put your task lists on there, and you only put events that are tentative or events that you are planning on going to. That means you're going to have blocks of time that are empty. So those are not free time. Do whatever you want, do whatever you feel like. Teaching your kids that those empty spaces of time, especially your adult kids, right, 21 and up, that time is there to take care of, could be your tasks, you're low on sleep, you're hungry, you need to socialize, you need to rest, like whatever your need is, do that. And a lot of the time your need probably is your task list or probably is homework. It'll be hard to do, but teaching them to constantly think about what are my needs? I have 3 hours right now. I have 10 minutes right now. What can I do? What should I do? And there's a list here of how you can manage it, but I won't go over this list, but just know this list is available if you want to know how to help them break that down. Okay, next. Okay, we're almost done. We're going to talk about norms now. So we talked about how to get them to do it more on their own. For those of you who will be working more with your kids and your family, we do need to make sure that we set like a new level of homeostasis. Norms. I talked about setting new norms by reengineering the environment, where things became an expectation without us really talking about it. And we did have to almost collude with students without them knowing, picking the right students who had influence, right? There's a study I like to reference, which is about, some of you may know if you've taken psychology, about these monkeys who were in this room. There's 5, and there's this huge pole and a beautiful like bouquet of fruit at the top. And they were salivating and they want this fruit. So they climb up really fast. And as they do, they would get shot off by these water cannons. These researchers would shoot them off. Super mean, right? And so as they do over and over, they never got the fruit. And what the researchers would do is they'd take one monkey out and bring a new one in. And that monkey is like, dude, free fruit. Let's do it. They run up. The other 4 monkeys grabbed that monkey and pulled them down over and over until that monkey goes, I guess what I'm supposed to do is grab any monkey that runs up there. They took one of the original monkeys out, brought a new one in, and the pattern repeated, including the monkey that never experienced the water cannons. And of course, they kept repeating the cycle until all 5 monkeys who had never experienced the water cannons would pull every new monkey down. Those norms are designed to protect. Sometimes when those change, they can be scary. For all of you, when you do new things, they could be even very helpful things, but when you do new things, your kids may be wary. Like, why is mom and dad talking about this now? Or why are they implementing this? It can be nerve wracking. But on the other hand, if you do it and you act normal and you feel okay and you talk openly, the way you set norms can come across very well. Even setting norms can be a norm, right? You set a new standard, you stick with it, you work with it, can go very well. And anytime you set a new norm, your kids just recognize, oh, they're doing the thing, they're trying something new. Next slide, please. Okay. Some things to keep in mind as you do this. When you work with boundaries, okay, and I'll talk about how I define boundaries, but when you work with boundaries, make sure that your kid who might feel some frustration or feel like um, things have not been fair, that you really do try and hear what's going on, and you might even make some adjustments based off of it if they are legitimate concerns. If they're not legitimate, like they feel like you treat them super unfairly compared to all the other siblings, but you've actually done a pretty good job, you think, then you at least get to empathize with the emotion. They feel pretty terrible, and that's not fun. Okay. That's a oversimplification, I'm sure, but that is still a route that you can go, right? A favorite quote of mine by Stephen Covey is trust is the ability to predict someone else's behavior. And when you become predictable, your child will be able to confide in you more, sure, but you also do become a type of safety for them. So becoming predictable is great. So when you set new norms and you do well with that, that can help them a ton. And when you do set new norms and make changes, it makes it less difficult for them to push back against it. So get good at setting norms.
And so one of the
Yes.
things that you said earlier, basically in a nutshell, is the apple doesn't always fall too far from the tree. So if we have an ADHD kid, then often one of the parents might be ADHD themselves, whether diagnosed or not. So implementing some of these strategies in our own life to basically show modeling is part of it, and it's a really great start.
Mhm. Oh man, even if, let's say, the dad is struggling with a skill, but they tell the kid, like, yo, I don't feel stressed about this until last second as well. And like this is a struggle of mine, but they're very open about it and clear and transparent, maybe even humorous, given whatever the relationship might be. It plays a pretty large role. And especially I think about shame reduction a lot. Shame isn't evil, but it can get in the way when it's in the wrong context or if the intensity is too high, right? So if that kid is blaming themselves a lot when they don't have to, parents can do a great job at reducing that shame. So yes, thank you, Allison.
That is really good, and I think I can speak again for my kids. That shame is always there. They're always behind. They're always
Yes.
ridiculed. They're always super aware of what they do wrong. The world tells them everything that they do wrong, and they don't hear as often the things that they're doing right. And so I do think that bringing that shame down opens that door for more success, because I think it can get to a point where they feel like, well, all I do is screw up and I'm just going to screw up. I'm a screw up. And then they start giving up because they
Yes.
expect nothing more. And so I feel like bringing that wall of shame down is so super important. And the one thing I can say again, because my kids are grown, is what you're working with as in grade school and elementary school, that shame wall and that embarrassment wall, the older they get, the more mature they get, the worse it is, right? The more aware they are. So if you do have younger kids already, the earlier that you can get that in check, the better, because all teenage years are tough. And I call the teenage years with ADHD is like I call it TTB, typical teenage behavior on steroids. You know,
Yes.
it is a lot. And so I think that the value of that early on and building up to what we know are going to be some maybe challenging years in those teenage years is helpful.
There's an element here that I really like. I'll be super brief with it. When it comes to this, how do I summarize this? This will be super brief, but if anyone has questions on it, we can do a deep dive. Oftentimes, the shame around I've done poorly or performed poorly on some task or set of tasks, it's often related to how do people perceive me? And so when we can admit or acknowledge a role model, hey, you know what? I turn in things late as well. And despite that, I can connect well with people, right? Maybe that plays less of a role, but me treating people with respect or me like whatever it is that helps me connect with people, that's still there. And helping your kids recognize this procrastination, this is going to be a struggle your whole life, but you can probably work through it. But you might have these skills. And so sometimes when I work with clients, instead of saying, hey, like, you know what? You you are fantastic at school. I might say, yeah, you're not the greatest at school. Does that get in the way of the fill in the blank? And they're like, you know what? My main goal is just to be liked. I want this person to like me. And that is really what we hone in on. Then shame can go down. And if those are connected, usually not, but if they get connected, they can really struggle. So modeling as parents is huge and helping them recognize really what matters, really what connects to what, especially around age 11 to 14 is where your brains shift from I need parents' respect to peer respect. That's where it starts to really hit them. So it's really, really helpful. Okay, new norms in the home. I recognize that we're a little short on time, so I'm going to kind of blitz through a couple of these, but that means I can go back if we have any other questions. New norms in the home. When you pick a new habit, you could pick the best habit for your kid, but 2 to 6 weeks, usually I see about 2 weeks for some habits that parents really try hard on, but it falls off. It doesn't last very long. It's about 2 weeks. And if they try a really easy one, they can do it for about 6 weeks. I say pick like a no excuses habit, something you'll do no matter what, rain or shine. You feel sick, you're stressed. If you can do it for like 3 months and you consistently do that, that is huge. Make it simple. Remember, make setting norms that new norm. And then if you set a rule for one kid, there are ways to make that rule global and not necessarily specific to them. We can get creative with it. You can kind of read this slide a little bit later or talk to me about that. But there are ways to make it feel less targeted, but fair. That's another new way to set a norm in the home. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. This is the last piece. When you are stuck and don't know what else to do, kid isn't listening, they won't start, they're intentionally resistant and they're unintentionally resistant. Everything's working against it. It really is okay to build a relationship. It really is okay to set aside some things. Maybe we have to do summer school, whatever it may be, but we see a lot of research, and we see this in our program as well. The parents who focus on really building rapport within some healthy boundaries do the greatest, and the students actually re-enter programs that they've dropped out of, or they actually push for college and they know where you wouldn't have. And it's because of that relationship. It's really hard. You can get both, right? And so parents try and push for both, but sometimes they end up sacrificing the relationship to do so in moments of anger or maybe rage. Like there are things that can be really tough on both ends. So build the relationship. Well, there's an exercise I would have liked to go through, but there's actually a pretty clearly written set of instructions on one of these slides. I'll briefly go over it, but I won't provide any examples yet. Next, please. Boundaries, there's a lot of different ways that people talk about boundaries. From a clinical and more therapeutic perspective, I don't want you to think of them as like a rule, like I'll break this rule this time, like, hey, I don't take calls after midnight. Well, unless there's an emergency. But that's not true if you haven't called 911 yet. But if you have called 911 and you're at the hospital and no one else is answering, then you can call me. So when people set boundaries with all these exceptions, it can be tough on yourself, and also on others too. But when you frame it as priorities, like it's a priority I get sleep, but it's a priority that you get the care that you need. But if I can get sleep and you get that when you call other family members first, right? But if they don't answer, then I can help you out and I can get my sleep. But you work on priorities. So it's not like they're breaking a rule. It's well, I might have to sacrifice sleep because you matter more, right? And you make that very clear. it helps. Okay? So when you talk to your kids and work with your kids on some exercises, make sure you're very clear about what the priority is. And that priority can shift. You can say, today I'm going to prioritize this. Hey, this week we're going to prioritize this. Totally fine. Next, please. Some different ways you can work on the relationship. When I use the word excitement, you want to work on that dopaminergic side. Right? You can connect, you can bond, but in this case, for younger people, excitement does a huge part of that. Okay? You don't have to necessarily bond in the way that adults like to bond. Expertise is a fun way. Ask them for help. You can play a video game you don't care about or get advice on a boss, totally fine. And last one is just ask them about an emotion. You can actually name an emotion and get it wrong, and that's totally fine. Hey, you seem like you're depressed, and get it wrong, and they say, no, I'm just sleepy. But that's okay. Just naming that shows that you're watching and trying to pay attention. Totally fine. Next, please. Yeah, okay, you can kind of see we're kind of blitzing through these, but we're almost done. Okay, this is an exercise I would like all of you to review. By far, this is where I sometimes even spend upwards of like 30, 45 minutes on this alone, practicing this. This is incredibly helpful for a lot of families when they encounter situations like, do I get my kid out of bed or do I get them to go to school? And flipping it from, I want them to get good rest and I want them to be successful in life to, I don't want my kid to be mad at me, but I don't want to worry about their future, and turning it into what your priorities are and relaying that to your kid. This exercise helps with that. So it's a boundary holding exercise. I have specific phrasing you would use, and you need to relay that to your child, or you can actually do it in many contexts, but relay it clearly to them. I would like everyone to review this at some time. Okay.
Ryan, so we are out of time for tonight, but I want you to wrap up with telling us the services that you guys provide. I know that you work all across the United States, not just in Texas. How do
Yes,
people connect with you?
absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the time. So at this point, the main way that you can connect with us is either going to our website, filling out a contact form. You can email me. But what we primarily do is help students learn these life skills, and we usually do it in the academic context. But we have plenty of students that just kind of want to work and get a job or do trade school. But that's a lot of what we do. We do it holistically. So if the issue is sleep disorders, or the issue is I can't seem to form social networks, we kind of look at what's getting in the way of school, and we kind of work in the background on everything else. So it's often a team effort. That's the short of it.
So
That's
you
what we do.
basically formulate a customized plan to said individual for the
Yes.
areas that they need help in, and you offer consultations. People can, everybody, if you joined late, everybody's getting a copy of today's slides and a link to the recording so you can go back to the content. On, we only dismissed one or two slides. We want to be
Yes.
considerate of your time. But definitely reach out to Ryan directly. He's got his website there, the phone number, office phone, his cell phone, and the QR code. And will this QR code take them to your website or to an appointment scheduling?
To website, I believe.
Okay, awesome. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. That, again, ADDA SR is, Pam Esser's baby. She born this baby back in 1987. And the reason she did is because she was frustrated as a parent of why are some of these organizations that serve, ADHD so incredibly expensive to join, or to get, why is everything so crazy expensive to join and get help. So we hope that you have found this content helpful. Again, our webinars every single month, we change topics. It might be meds, it might be therapy, it might be testing. We've done all kinds of different webinars, even some of it just nurturing heart and that kind of thing, some of the different approaches to working with our kids. So join us again. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ryan, for being with us. This is the very first time that we've had a webinar with Ryan and Level Up Life, and so we certainly appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you, Allison. Take care, everyone.